And good morning, everyone. We are back. And on the phone, because of course it is Friday, Scott Braddock. Good morning, Scott.
Morning, Dave. Good morning, Matt. How are y'all?
It's a Friday, so we're pretty good. Always glad to talk to you because it's always on a Friday.
Absolutely. TGIF.
What's going on in your world today?
Well, we're keeping track of this Fort Bend County special election I heard Jacob Estrada talking about. It's interesting. You have Beto O'Rourke and all these national Democrats so invested in a Texas House race. It'd be like if they were all excited about, beating Dustin Burrows or something out there in Lubbock.
Yeah.
So why do all these people care? They've had Beto O'Rourke block walking for this guy. Joe Biden has endorsed, for this lady, Joe Biden has endorsed the Democrat who's running. So has Elizabeth Warren, and Mike Bloomberg was out there in the district campaigning for the Democrat, Julian Castro, all these folks. And I'm looking at it thinking, and Chad Hasty and I talked about this earlier in the week, how in the world are Democrats going to be able to win this seat? I just don't know. I'm looking at the numbers, and since I talked to Chad, I have some new information for y'all exclusively here on the morning show. We were able to unearth the actual internal poll from the Republican candidate in this race, a guy named Gary Gates. We have the results of that at QuorumReport.com. It shows the Republican is up over the Democrat by 13 points. And so, this weekend, Governor Abbott is supposedly going to bus in Republican block walkers from all over the state. In fact, I saw some social media traffic just yesterday that said that even some people from Alabama who are Republicans were coming in. They wanted to be like a strike force, like they would send to Iowa when one of our Republicans are running for president. So the eyes of the nation on this thing, NBC News, the Associated Press, and others have done national stories about how this could be the bellwether for what's going to happen in Texas and the nation.
So in other words, the Democrats may not want this to be the bellwether.
Well, I think it's just not the bellwether. This is just a Republican district.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It's I'm looking at some of the other districts around the state that we've talked about here on the morning show that are, sort of these suburban districts where you may see some actual changes, where some of the races were more like 2 points or 3 points apart in 2018. In 2018, we saw all that news coverage about Democrats, picking up Texas House seats. In 2018, the Republican in this district that we're talking about beat the Democrat by 9 points. Not close. In fact, that tracks with how President Trump performed over Secretary Clinton back in 2016.
Right.
So I'm just not sure where the Democrats are going to find all these votes. That said, it is a special election. It's kind of like spinning the roulette wheel.
Yeah, I know.
You never know exactly what's going to happen. Anything could happen.
Hey, it depends on who shows up, man.
Depends on who shows up. I can tell you I was in the district over the weekend, this past weekend, and the Democrats are definitely out there, block walking as well, doing as much as they can to try to flip this thing. But I think they would have to completely remake the electorate in the area to be able to make it happen. And a friend, I'll say one other thing, Matt. One friend of mine, a Republican from Houston, said, look, the Democrats, at first, it's sort of like they had no downside on this thing because they could say, look, if they win, it's a huge fundraising gold mine. They'll say, if we can win there, we can win anywhere. That's true. But after the election's over, if the Republican wins, they could say, well, it's a Republican district. We can't win that anyway. No big deal. But they built it up so much, and there's so much hype. And my friend said, only Texas Democrats could set up Republicans to be able to brag about winning in Katy, Texas.
Yeah, so it's
pretty rough.
Let me ask you this. This is what I find interesting, making a big deal out of a special election like this, are they not going to have to just turn right around and
Yes.
re-elect them again?
That's a good question. They're looking for the big headline on the win in this if they can get it on the Democratic side. But that's right. They would have to turn right around and win in the primary and win in the general. The person who wins this special election, whether it's the Republican or the Democrat, because, look, this is going to be an interesting year where we're going to see some Democrats win in some interesting places. But the person who wins on Tuesday coming up next week, the only thing they might ever really get out of it is Texas House of Representatives letterhead. They may never serve a day in the legislature. By the time the next legislature is sworn in 2021, someone else may have already won the seat by then.
Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering. I mean, and
right.
I mean, they may
You're
be
on it.
it doesn't even make sense to make this a big deal at this point in the time.
I think the way to think about it is not so much about the individual candidates and whether they're going to actually get to serve in the legislature. I know that may sound strange, but the way to think about it is, for the Democrats, this is about taking the majority and showing some kind of momentum toward that goal in the Texas House. And for the Republicans, it's about majority preservation, about keeping the Republicans in charge of state government.
Yeah. Okay. One other thing, something that we talk about a lot, we're looking at the state, and I mean, Donald Trump is just kind of an X factor that we don't know what's going to happen. He may just bring the Democrats out against him. He may bring the Republicans out for him, and who knows what's going to happen. But at this point in the state, is there any thoughts at all or any looks at all about whether the Democrats are going to be able to take over the House?
You know, if the Democrats, I would say by some miracle for them, were able to win this seat on Tuesday, which, again, anything can happen, that would put them only 8 seats away. They're 9 seats away now, 8 seats away from taking over the majority in the Texas House. And it's completely doable based on the numbers I've seen out of places like the suburbs around Dallas-Fort Worth, some of these other suburban seats that are in the Houston area, and a few others. You can argue your way to Democrats being able to pick up somewhere between maybe 8 and 12 Texas House seats, which would definitely put them in charge and in position to elect a Democratic Speaker of the House. But you also have to temper that with the fact that, number one, the seat we're talking about right now in Fort Bend County is a Republican seat, and there are at least 3 that I can think of, one in the Houston area, in fact, one that's not far from this seat in Fort Bend, one that's right up the road, right in the heart of Katy, where a Democrat's going to have to really defend that seat. There was a Democrat who won in Katy, but only won with 49% because there were 3 people in the race, or one with a plurality. There's one south of Houston, and at least one other where it looks like Democrats have to really defend these seats. So it's not just that they're trying to pick up some, Matt. They also have to make sure that they don't lose any of the 12 that they picked up in 2018.
Well, I've got one other question as far as this is concerned, and this is more about your personal opinion. You may refuse to answer it, knowing you.
Oh, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, just because sometimes you don't like to look at the future very much, but you've got a good chance right now. It looks like possibly that. And I know that a lot of the major Democrats are against him, but Bernie Sanders looks poised to possibly become the nomination. If he does, in your opinion, is that going to hurt some of the Democrats from moving forward in a place like Texas?
I think that Bernie Sanders is a more difficult candidate in Texas for the Democrats. No question. You're right about that. I think someone more like Biden is probably a safer choice in Texas. The whole idea of running against the Democratic Socialist is sort of the dream of Texas Republicans, but the other thing is, because we don't have straight ticket voting anymore, we've talked about this some here on the show, in these Texas House races and the Texas Senate as well, and other races up and down the ballot, the candidates really have to sink or swim on their own. It can't just be, Matt, that they're against Trump or for Trump, or against Sanders or for Sanders. They really have to make the case about either why they are a good member of the Texas House, what they've done for their communities, or they have to make the case that the person who, if they're a challenger, that the person who's in that seat shouldn't be there, and give the voters some reason to fire that person. And it's not going to be. It still does matter. You're right to think that it matters. Which Democrat is at the top of the ticket, but because those races are delinked now, and people don't just push that one button for all Republican or all Democrat, it really is incumbent on the individual candidates to make the case to voters to either hire me or fire that person.
Well, and I agree with you. I think the big downside to Bernie Sanders is not necessarily what people are going to vote. It's what people will actually come out to vote. Are the moderate Democrats even going to be willing to come out and vote if they hate Donald Trump, but they're not willing to vote for Bernie Sanders?
I still believe, based on polling that I'm looking at and based on the election results in 2018, then because, we all remember how accurate the polls were leading into 2016.
Yeah.
We all knew that President Trump was going to win, right? But looking at the vote totals for Democrats as a result of backlash to President Trump all across the country and including Texas, the vote totals were higher than the backlash to President Obama in 2010, which you may remember resulted in the Texas House. They went from 76 Republicans to 74 Democrats to 100 Republicans in 2010. The Republican Party has put districts in place in the state that make it harder for Democrats to do something like that on their side. So that's kind of like building a fortress against that kind of thing. But I do think the voter intensity will be there, and it will be more about President Trump than about whoever the Democrat is.
Well, and the districts have changed.
Let me ask you this: this straight ticket law. This seems to me like this is really going to hurt Republicans.
That is the thought that I hear from a lot of folks, especially in rural Texas, in places where you are in Lubbock, West Texas, out in East Texas. People who run Republican parties, county chairmen, have said, this was our whole campaign previously. We would just say, vote Republican, and do that up and down the ballot. But in the cities, especially in Houston and Dallas, Fort Worth, the Republican leadership, including Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and the former Speaker Strauss, they were convinced that Republicans would have a better shot in those urban areas. And in some ways, I'm from the country too. I grew up in Wharton County. In some ways, it's dismissive to those of us who are from the rural parts of the state because they just assume that we're all going to vote Republican, and that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Hey,
okay.
So we're running out of time, but what do you have going on the Quorum Report right now, Scott?
Well, we'll be keeping track of the special election, that's for sure. There has been one twist and turn after another down in Fort Bend County. I have a bet going with somebody. I do think, and you mentioned that I don't like to predict the future, but a friend of mine who's a Democrat said that they would eat a hat if the Republican wins by more than 5 points.
That doesn't sound tasty.
Well, there's a woman here in Austin that makes custom cookies, so I'm having her make some cowboy hat cookies for him because I think I'm going to drop those off at his office on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So we're keeping track of all that stuff for you at quorumreport.com. You can sign up for our free emails there. Thank you.
All right. Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report. Thanks for calling in. We'll talk to you next week.
Yes, sir.
All right.